Before I worked in medical billing compliance, I was the kind of person who believed that if you were honest and worked hard and loved someone completely, the universe would return the favor. I know better now. I had been with my husband for 11 years. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party in Ottawa. He was funny, easy to talk to, the kind of man who remembered small things, like how you took your coffee and which side of the bed you preferred. We got married when I was 26. We bought a semi-detached in Barrhaven, the kind of neighborhood where people wave at each other from driveways and argue pleasantly about whose turn it is to clear the sidewalk after a snowfall. We had a daughter. Her name is Zoe, and she was 4 years old when everything fell apart. Zoe was born with a congenital heart condition, not immediately life-threatening, but serious enough that she needed regular monitoring, specialist appointments at CHEU, and medication that without our provincial coverage and my employer's supplemental benefits plan would have cost us nearly $800 a month. She was a cheerful kid. She didn't know she was sick in the way adults understand sickness. She just knew that sometimes she had to go see the doctor who had a fish tank in the waiting room, and that her chest scar was what happened when she was a baby and the doctors helped her heart work better. My husband knew all of this. He had been there for the surgery. He had held my hand in the waiting room for 6 hours, or so I thought. I found out about the other woman on a Tuesday in February. Not through a text message I wasn't supposed to see, not through a friend who felt obligated to tell me. I came home early from a compliance audit. I'd finished ahead of schedule, and she was standing in my kitchen, wearing one of my husband's shirts, pouring coffee into one of my mugs. She looked at me the way people look at someone they weren't expecting to have to deal with. My husband was behind her. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "This is actually good timing. We need to talk." The conversation that followed was the most deliberately humiliating thing anyone has ever done to me. He didn't stumble or apologize or ask for time to explain. He had clearly prepared. He told me he hadn't been happy for years. He told me the house was in his name, which was technically true because at the time of purchase, I had been between jobs and we had agreed casually, the way you agree to things when you trust someone completely, that we'd sort out the paperwork later. He told me his name was also on all our joint accounts, and his was the primary income on our tax filings. He told me he'd been speaking to a lawyer. "You can take your things," he said. "Zoe stays with me. I'm more financially stable." I stood there in my own kitchen and I did not cry. I don't know why. Maybe I was in shock. Maybe some part of me, the part that spent 10 years reviewing financial disclosures and catching errors that other people missed, understood immediately that I needed to pay very close attention to everything he was saying. I left that night with 2 suitcases and my daughter, who I was not going to leave behind, regardless of what he said about financial stability. I drove to my parents' place in Kanata and sat at their kitchen table while my mother made tea. Neither of us drank, and I thought about what I actually knew. I knew the house was registered in his name. I knew our checking and savings accounts listed him as the primary account holder. I knew his business. He ran a small property management company, had done significantly better in the last 3 years than his lifestyle suggested. I knew this because I had helped him with his bookkeeping when his company first started, before my own career got busy, and I remembered what the revenue numbers used to look like. I also knew that in Ontario, what matters in a matrimonial home isn't whose name is on the deed. I had looked this up once, years earlier, out of idle curiosity, the way you look things up when you're watching a legal drama and wondering how accurate it is. I called a family lawyer the next morning. She had an office near Westboro in the kind of calm, matter-of-fact manner that made me feel, for the first time since Tuesday, like I was going to be okay. She explained what I already suspected. Under the Family Law Act in Ontario, the matrimonial home is treated differently from other assets. Both spouses have equal right to possession, regardless of whose name is on the title. Equalization of net family property applies to everything accumulated during the marriage. His name being on the accounts didn't mean the money was his. "What about his business?" I asked. She looked at me carefully. What do you know about his business? I told her what I knew. That when I had last been involved with the bookkeeping, around 6 years ago, gross revenue was around 350,000 annually. That his lifestyle in recent years, the truck he'd replaced twice, the ski trips, the renovations he'd done to a rental property he claimed was barely breaking even, didn't match the income he reported on our joint tax returns. She wrote something down. Do you have any documentation from the period when you were helping with the books? I did. I had kept everything. Old spreadsheets on a hard drive I hadn't thought about in years, copies of bank statements I'd printed during tax season, emails between the two of us where he'd asked me to reconcile accounts and I had. I had kept them the way I keep everything, out of professional habit. Because in my work, you learn very quickly that documentation is the only thing that stands between you and a very uncomfortable conversation with an auditor. My lawyer said she wanted to bring in a forensic accountant to review his business financials once disclosure was ordered. I said that wouldn't be necessary. She raised an eyebrow. I told her what I did for a living. For the next 2 months, I went to work every day. I picked Zoe up from daycare. I helped her with the exercises and gave her her medication and read to her at night. On the outside, I was doing exactly what my husband expected me to do, managing on my own, struggling, trying to hold things together without his income. He knew I was staying at my parents'. He knew my salary, which was good but not extravagant. He had, through his lawyer, offered me what he called a fair settlement that involved me receiving 30% of the estimated home equity and no spousal support because, his lawyer argued, I was employed full-time and capable of supporting myself. He did not know what I was doing between 9 and 11 o'clock every night after Zoe went to sleep. The financial disclosure process in Ontario family law requires both parties to provide full and sworn disclosure of their assets, liabilities, and income. His disclosure, when it arrived, was a masterpiece of omission. His company's revenue had apparently been flat for 4 consecutive years. His personal income, per his sworn statement, was just under $90,000 annually. He had declared one rental property, the one I knew about, with a stated value of $380,000 and a mortgage that left him with minimal equity. I went through every page 3 times. Then I started cross-referencing. Land registry records in Ontario are public. I found 2 properties he had not declared. One was a condo in Gatineau, registered in a numbered company I'd never heard of. The other was a small commercial unit in Vanier, also held by a corporation. I ran the corporate registry numbers. Both companies had been incorporated within the last 4 years. Both listed him as the sole director. I went back to my old spreadsheets. I found the thread where he had asked me to set up a separate accounts folder for what he called his expansion properties. I had done it. I had organized the files. I had, at the time, thought nothing of it, because he had mentioned wanting to grow the business and I trusted him. The condo in Gatineau was being rented out. I knew this because the numbered company had a business listing online, a property management profile he had apparently forgotten to make private, that included the unit among its active rental inventory. There was more. His personal spending, which I reconstructed from the credit card statements that had come to our home address during the marriage and which I had kept, showed regular transfers to an account I didn't recognize. Not small amounts. $4,000 to $6,000, sometimes more, every quarter, going somewhere that didn't show up in his disclosure. I compiled everything into a binder. Index tabs, chronological order, source citations. It looked like a compliance report because functionally that's what it was. The thing about my husband was that he believed I was soft. He had always seen my patience as weakness, my willingness to accommodate as lack of backbone. When he told me to leave and I left, I think he believed he had confirmed something he'd always suspected about me, that when it came down to it, I wouldn't fight. He had 11 years of evidence to support that theory. He was wrong. There was a moment, somewhere around the 6-week mark, that I almost let it go, not because I thought he deserved to win, but because the whole process was so exhausting, and Zoe had a cardiology appointment that week, and she'd had a rough night, and I was up at 3 in the morning, sitting on the edge of her bed listening to her breathe. She had asked me earlier that evening why she couldn't go home. She meant our house in Barrhaven, with her room and her drawings on the wall. I told her we were going to have a new home soon. She said she wanted her fish. We had left the fish. I thought about that for a long time. About a man who could sit across a table from a child with a heart condition and calculate that removing her from his benefit plan would save him money. About a man who had watched me administer medication to our 4-year-old and had apparently filed a mental note that the medication cost was a useful variable in a financial equation. I went back to work on the binder. Our war case went to a settlement conference first, as most family law cases do in Ontario. His lawyer arrived with the same 30% offer, dressed up in slightly more professional language. My lawyer arrived with my binder. I watched his lawyer's expression as she flipped through the index. There's a specific kind of stillness that comes over someone's face when they realize that the situation they have been describing to their client is not the situation they are actually in. I have seen it before in my professional life. It is never not interesting. His lawyer asked for a recess. My lawyer and I sat in a small meeting room and she poured water from a plastic pitcher and said quietly, "You did good work." The recess lasted 40 minutes. When they came back, the offer had changed. He was now willing to discuss an equal split of the matrimonial home equity. He was prepared to provide updated disclosure. He wanted to know if we could agree to keep the numbered companies out of the discussion. My lawyer looked at me. I shook my head. The case did not settle that day. What followed was 3 more months of legal process. His lawyer argued that the Gatineau property was a premarital asset acquired through inheritance. The corporate records showed it had been purchased 4 years into our marriage. His lawyer argued that the transfers I had identified were repayments of personal loans from a family member. No documentation was produced to support this. His lawyer argued that my involvement in the bookkeeping years earlier constituted some kind of shared knowledge of the corporate structure. My lawyer pointed out that shared knowledge of an asset's existence and concealment of that asset in sworn disclosure are meaningfully different things. The judge who heard our motion for full financial disclosure was a woman with reading glasses on a chain and the focused patience of someone who had heard every version of this argument before. She ordered full corporate disclosure within 21 days. She also made a comment, measured and precise, about the court's expectations regarding sworn financial statements and the consequences of failing to meet them. His lawyer was very quiet after that. When the full corporate disclosure finally arrived, there were 3 properties in the numbered companies, not 2. The third was a townhouse in Orleans that had been purchased 2 years earlier and was currently generating $2,200 a month in rental income. There was a line of credit attached to one of the corporations, nearly fully drawn, that existed nowhere in his original disclosure. The equalization process took longer than it would have otherwise because the asset pool was substantially larger than he had originally claimed. My lawyer filed for costs on the grounds that the failure to disclose had unnecessarily prolonged the proceedings. The judge agreed. The final order gave me equalization of the full net family property, including the undisclosed assets. It gave me the Barrhaven house because Zoe and I needed stability and I could afford to carry the mortgage on my salary. It gave me spousal support for 3 years on the basis that my career advancement had been limited by the years when I had reduced my hours to manage Zoe's medical needs and his company's bookkeeping. It gave me Zoe, with generous access for him, because I am not the kind of person who uses a child as leverage, even against someone who uses her as a line item. His lawyer submitted a bill for costs that I understand was substantial. His company, now subject to proper accounting scrutiny through the disclosure process, had obligations that required immediate attention. I moved back into the house in Barrhaven on a Thursday in October. Zoe helped me carry her books inside. She found a fish. My mother had retrieved them and kept them at her house, which I hadn't told Zoe, because I wanted to see her face when she found them. She ran from room to room, checking that everything was still where she remembered it. The drawing she had taped to the inside of her bedroom door was still there. She stood in front of it for a moment, then looked back at me. "We're home," she said. "There are things people say about situations like mine, that you have to fight for yourself, that you have to be brave. I don't think that's quite it. I wasn't brave in any dramatic sense. I was methodical. I paid attention. I kept records of things that seemed unimportant at the time, because in my work, you learn that the thing that seems unimportant is often the thing that matters most. My husband thought the version of me he had decided I was, the accommodating one, the patient one, the one who left quietly when asked, was the whole picture. He had been looking at me for 11 years and he had never actually seen what I did for a living. The fish are still alive. Zoe is doing well. Her last cardiology appointment was the best we've had in 2 years. I have a good supplemental benefits plan at work, and so does she, because her coverage is now listed under my name. That part I made sure of first.